The first thing Harrow's Reach lost was its weather, not the weather itself. The wind kept moving over the ridgeline the way it always had, dragging grit against the solar arrays. What went missing was the reading of it. The mass sensor on Tower 4 went from a steady green line to a flat one, mid-transmission, as though someone had reached out and pinched the signal shut between two fingers. Mireille Kade was watching the board when it happened. The number didn't drop to 0, it simply stopped being a number at all. The display held the last recorded value, frozen, honest about nothing. She gave it 4 seconds before she called it in. In 4 seconds, Tower 6 went the same way, then Tower 2. Then, with a speed that folded her stomach in on itself, every mast on the eastern ridge, one after another, like candles pinched out by a hand moving too fast to see. No flash, no tremor underfoot, no proximity alarm, because the alarms ran through the same network that had just gone dark. Harrow's Reach was a border colony of 600 people, packed into 4 kilometers of pressurized corridor. Its entire purpose was to be the first thing anyone saw coming. Now it was blind, and no one had fired a single shot. Kade was moving before she finished that thought, boots slapping the ring corridor toward the command dome. The wrongness followed her the whole way, not an absence of sound, an absence of response. The colony's comm chatter, a low, constant murmur in her ear through the relay bead, had gone from 100 small voices to nothing. Nothing is a very loud thing to a person used to noise. She passed the hydroponics chief in the corridor. He had his hand flat against a junction box, as if he could feel through his palm what the panel could no longer tell him. She didn't stop to explain. She had nothing true to say yet. Further down, a maintenance drone sat frozen mid-turn, its work light still burning, its task queue simply gone. A child's tablet propped against a bulkhead showed the last frame of a video that would never finish loading. Small things, none of them dangerous on their own. Together, they added up to a colony that had stopped being able to hear itself think. Colonel Ashwin Pryce was standing over a bank of screens that had gone from scrolling telemetry to identical gray rectangles, each one holding its last honest number like a held breath. He didn't look up when she came in. He asked her one question. Not what was doing this, what it was eating. They called it the Hush before they understood it. A name was easier to hold than a shrug. Kade built her theory in the colony archive, a low room lined with physical drives nobody had trusted to the network in 30 years. The Ledger, everyone called it, half server room, half museum. It was the one place in Harrow's Reach where information sat still instead of moving. It was also the one place the silence hadn't reached. That told her something. She fed a clean test tone into a dead relay line, just to watch. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The tone sat on the line, patient, unremarkable. Then the readout flickered once, and the tone was gone. No error, no spike. Just absence, arriving exactly where sound had been a heartbeat before. She tried it again on a second line, this time letting the tone repeat over and over, the way a distress ping repeats. It lasted less than a second the second time. Whatever was listening had learned something from the first attempt. She ran one more test before she trusted the pattern enough to name it. She played a burst of pure static down a third line. No structure, no repetition, nothing that looked like a message at all. It sat there for almost 2 full minutes before it finally guttered out. 2 minutes was an eternity compared to 3 seconds. The hush wasn't blind to noise. It simply didn't find noise worth the effort. She sat with her hand on the console longer than she needed to, feeling, for the first time that morning, the particular cold of being listened to by something with no interest in being heard back. The hush was not attacking devices, it was attacking traffic. And it learned. Pryce, listening to her lay it out in the ledger's low light, said only that a creature that ate conversation had clearly never had the misfortune of eating a human one. Neither of them laughed. The garrison's defense grid ran on exactly the kind of conversation the hush was already devouring, tower by tower. Here was the trap, once she stopped flinching from it. The more the colony tried to coordinate through its usual channels, the faster it fed the thing, disabling those channels. Every broadcast order, every status update, every plea for reinforcement, not a signal reaching for help. Food. And there was a second cruelty in it. A device that failed once and went quiet was left alone. A device that kept retrying, kept broadcasting on schedule the way it had been built to, was fed on again and again, faster each time, until the retrying itself became the thing that killed it, the colony's own discipline, its habit of never giving up on a signal, for the length of that morning, its single greatest liability. The Ithra came down without ceremony. 3 landers touched the ridge with the flat, unhurried confidence of something that had already won. They didn't look like conquerors. That was the worst part. They moved through the outer corridor in loose, unarmored clusters, tall, gray-skinned, entirely unbothered, the way a person walks through a house they already own. Wherever they passed, whatever electronics remained came apart into that same patient silence. Kade watched a defense turret swivel once, twice, and stop mid-motion. The hush wasn't a device they carried. It was a field they made simply by being present and coordinated, an ambient hunger radiating outward from however they spoke to one another. She counted 11 of them from the overlook, moving in a loose formation that never quite became a line and never quite became a scatter. It looked, if she let herself think about it too long, less like a patrol than like a single organism sampling a new environment with 11 extended hands. She watched them from the ridge overlook for less than a minute, long enough to notice they made no sound at all. No gesture passed visibly between them. Whatever language they shared, it traveled by some channel she had no instrument left to catch. A threat that shouted would have been almost a comfort. This was a single mind wearing several bodies, and none of the bodies needed to speak. Pryce tried the old way first because the old way was the only training either of them had. He ordered a coordinated fallback over the garrison net, every squad pulling to the second perimeter on a single broadcast signal, timed to the second, the kind of maneuver that had held borderlines for 100 years. The order reached maybe a third of his people. The hush surged through the remaining channels like a fire, finding a room full of paper. Squad leaders stood with their hands on dead relays, repeating a call sign into silence, unaware that each repetition only sharpened the thing hunting their signal. 3 squads, cut off mid-signal with no order telling them to move, held their old positions, and were overtaken. Thomas Reyes was 19, and he had spent the morning doing exactly what runners always did, carrying paper between towers that had already lost their radios. He liked the work, if he was honest about it. There was a rhythm to it that the radios never had. A radio call ended the moment the words stopped. A run had a beginning, a middle, and an arrival, and he could feel the whole shape of it in his legs before he was halfway through. He was 300 meters short of the second perimeter when the fallback order went out over the garrison net. He never heard it. He wasn't wired to hear it. He was wired to run. His boots hit the packed earth of the service trail in a rhythm he'd kept since dawn. Left, right, left. His breath came hard and even, the kind of breath a body learns to trust after enough miles. Sweat had soaked through the collar of his jacket an hour ago, and he'd stopped noticing it. In his satchel, a single folded slip of paper, hold position, second perimeter, awaiting relief. He didn't see the Ithra cluster until it was already between him and the tower line. 3 shapes, gray against the gray rock, moving without hurry. He stopped running. For a moment nothing happened. His radio bead, dead since Tower 4 went dark, gave one weak click in his ear, the first sound it had made all morning. Not a voice, not static, just a click, small and wrong, like something testing whether the line was worth using at all. He took a step back. The click came again, closer to a hum now, threading up through his skull the way a headache does before it announces itself. He reached for the bead to tear it out. His hand didn't finish the motion. His heartbeat, which he could usually feel only after a hard climb, seemed suddenly very loud in his own ears. He would have said, if there had been anyone left to say it to, that the hum wasn't coming from the bead at all anymore. It was coming from somewhere behind his eyes. The sound stopped, not faded. Stopped, the way a held note stops when a hand closes over the string. Everything after that happened at once and without him. The satchel was found an hour later at the second perimeter, buckle still fastened, the message inside never delivered and never needed, because the order it carried had already been eaten on a channel 400 meters away. Kade heard about it secondhand from the runner who found the satchel. She did not have time to grieve it properly. That would come later, as a debt owed once there was a later to owe it in. What she had in that hour was the last piece of the shape she'd been building. Reyes hadn't died because paper was slow. He'd died because the order that mattered had gone out through the network anyway, competing with everything else for a channel already starving. The failure wasn't in the runner. It was in still trusting the wire, even at the edges, even in the hands of a boy who no longer carried one. Kade slammed her fist on the ledger's steel table hard enough to sting. Not out of anger. Out of the sudden physical need to move something, hit something, after an hour of doing nothing but think. The sound of it, bone on steel, in a room the hush had never touched, was the loudest thing she'd heard all day, and it cleared her head the way nothing else had. The hush ate structure. It ate anything organized enough to be a message, fast enough to be worth eating, on any channel built to carry it far. What it had never once touched, in 6 hours of patient consumption, was the low, unglamorous traffic that had never been worth its notice. A hand signal across open ground, a pattern of taps against a bulkhead, a covered lantern, blinking a rhythm 3 garrison veterans still remembered from a decade-old drill. None of it traveled a wire, none of it looked like food. She said it out loud to Pryce, once plainly. Humans had never trusted just one way of saying anything. They spoke, and also gestured, and also drew, and also beat rhythms into hollow metal long after words alone would have done the job. It had always looked wasteful. It had never once been wasted. Right now, it was the only inheritance the colony had that the sky hadn't learned to eat. It would be slower, smaller. No elegant order reaching 600 people at once. Instead, 100 small, ugly relays. Runner to runner, tap to tap, lantern to lantern. Pryce gave the order on foot tower by tower. Stop reaching for the network. Use what the hush never learned to want. A squad leader at the 3rd tower pushed back. A hand sign could be misread across smoke and distance in a way a clean signal never could. Pryce didn't disagree. He told her a misread sign was a problem they could survive. A perfect order that never arrived was not. There was no answer to that either of them wanted to give twice. What followed was not fast, it was not clean. It was hand signals moving down a corridor faster than anyone expected. Once nothing was competing for the same starving channel. It was Kade, sprinting the ring corridor again, carrying a decision in her own mouth instead of a packet of code, stopping twice for breath she didn't have to spare. It was a boy no older than Reyes had been, standing at the mouth of the 2nd perimeter with a covered lantern, blinking out fallback in a code his grandmother had taught him as a game, his hands steadier than Kade's had been all day. There were mistakes. A relay dropped at the 4th tower cost a full minute of confusion before a runner doubled back to fix it. For that minute, the whole eastern line held on nothing but guesswork and nerve. No one died in that minute. But Kade would remember how close it felt to the same silence that took Reyes, a message simply failing to arrive, only this time caught and mended by someone willing to run the distance twice. Elsewhere, small improvisations held the line together. A cook at the mess hall began banging a ladle against a steel pot in a pattern the kitchen staff had once used as a joke, 3 short and 1 long, meaning move now, and watched it get picked up and passed on by people who had never worked a shift in that kitchen in their lives. A woman on the 2nd tier started waving a strip of orange cloth from a balcony rail, an old harbor signal her grandfather had taught her, and 2 full squads changed position because of it before anyone thought to ask where she'd learned it. None of it was elegant. All of it worked. And then, near the end, something none of them had planned for. Starved of the rich, structured meal the network had been feeding it all morning, the hush thinned. It didn't vanish. But the field around the Ithra clusters grew patchy, uneven, easy to slip through the gaps. A turret above the 2nd perimeter, gone still for hours, gave one final shudder. Then it woke, tracked, and fired. The sound of it rolled off the ridge and cracked back off the corridor walls, the first true violence the colony had made all day, and for 1 long second, the entire eastern line went dead silent in a way that had nothing to do with the hush at all, the ordinary human silence of people holding their breath at once. The round took the ground 6 meters short of the nearest Ithra cluster and threw up a column of rock and dust, the shock wave ringing across the stone like a struck bell. It didn't need to hit anything. It only needed to answer the question of whether anyone was still watching the ridge, and it answered loud enough that no one on that line would forget the sound of it. The Ithra pulled back to their landers before dusk. No wreckage behind them, no surrender, nothing a historian could point to and call a victory outright. But they went, and they went quickly, and the last human sound they heard leaving Harrow's reach was not silence at all. It was a cannon, and 600 people who had found their voice again. The network came back slowly, in pieces, the way hearing returns after a very loud, very close sound. Kade spent the first hour of it turning half the restored channels back off. On purpose, 600 people needed to remember, a while longer, how much they'd leaned on a single lattice of signal and how to do without it. Pryce held a service for Reyes at the second perimeter, at the exact spot the satchel was found. He said very little. There was very little that needed saying twice. Kade set the unfastened buckle down in the dirt there herself. She did not pick it back up. She stood at the edge of it after, looking east along the ridge where the towers had gone dark that morning, one after another. The thing that saved them wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a wall. It was the oldest, least efficient habit the species had never managed to break, the refusal to trust any single way of being heard. Whatever mind had built the hush had shaped a hunger for one kind of prey, the kind that puts all its faith in a wire. It hadn't accounted for a species that kept singing after it invented the radio, kept drawing after it invented the camera, kept a boy walking letters between towers long after it built machines meant to make him unnecessary. For a few days, Harrow's reach ran quieter than it had in years, not because the network stayed down, but because the people running it simply reached for it less. Runners kept walking routes that no longer strictly needed walking. The boy with the lantern kept it charged by his cot, though nobody told him to. Somewhere along the eastern ridge, a squad leader started teaching hand signs to anyone who'd stand still long enough to learn them, off the clock, for no reason she could fully explain, except that she wanted more of the colony fluent in a language the sky couldn't eat. 3 days later, a courier ship arrived from the capital with orders to reinforce the border. Folded in with them, a quieter note. 2 other outposts along the frontier had gone dark that same week. The same pattern, the same infinite patience. Neither had answered since. Kade read it standing in the ledger, where the light never used to flicker. She thought about Reyes briefly, the way she now thought about him several times a day without meaning to. Not the satchel, not the buckle. The rhythm of his boots on the service trail, which she had heard exactly once, in passing, weeks before any of this began, and hadn't known to remember until it was the only thing left of him worth keeping. She didn't reach for the network to tell anyone. She picked up a lantern, covered the lens, and walked out into the dark.